Hello everyone. Thank you for coming out here tonight. It's really wonderful to see such a full room. My name's Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the events team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, just a few quick logistics for the night. First off, we are going to ask that everyone keeps their mask on at all times while at the event tonight. We are going to be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the event, so start thinking of your questions now and then hang on to them. And then after the talk, Dan's going to be signing and personalizing books at the desk at the back of the store where you all checked in. We'll also have additional books for purchase there. And if you're joining us virtually on YouTube, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Sleepwalk online, and you can use the link in the live stream description to do so. All right, with all of that out of the way, I'm very, very excited to introduce tonight Dan, Chaon, and Rumaan alum, who are here celebrating the release of Dan's new book, Sleepwalk. This new thriller follows Will Bear, a man jumping state lines and swapping aliases faster than anyone can catch him. But one day he receives a call from a woman claiming to be his biological daughter, upending the life he's constructed. What follows is a brilliant story that blends intrigue, dark humor, and Dan's signature addictive storytelling. Sleepwalk opens with a perfectly fitting epigraph from Rumi: "That which you seek is also seeking you," inviting the reader to think deeply about the surveillance state and human connection, and we're so very excited to be celebrating this title with you all tonight. Dan Chaon is the author of 6 previous books, including Ill Will, a national bestseller, named one of the 10 best books of 2017 by Publishers Weekly. Dan's fiction has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, the Pushcart Prize anthologies, and the O. Henry Collection. He has been a finalist for the National Magazine Award in Fiction and the Shirley Jackson Award, and he was the recipient of an Academy Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And as I mentioned, Dan is joined in conversation tonight by Rumaan alum. Rumaan is the author of the novels Rich and Pretty, That Kind of Mother, and the instant New York Times bestseller, Leave the World Behind. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, Book Forum, and the New Republic, where he is a contributing editor. So, with all of that out of the way, everyone please give a very warm welcome to Dan and Rumaan.
Julia did not mention that I was Dan's student.
So is basically
many years ago. Too many years. I don't want to talk about how many years. In fact, everyone in the audience who's above a certain age will understand that I can't read my own questions with my glasses on anymore, which is a terrible embarrassment. Dan is going to read, but first, I like to always force the writers I'm talking to do this thing that's actually really hard to do, especially with this book, which is to sell me on the book. What is the elevator pitch for Sleepwalk? Can you describe this book? And
I've tried. It's a big-hearted red shirt mercenary discovers that he has a daughter and
Does he have a daughter?
Well.
Right. Okay, go on.
And has to make a moral and emotional choice about whether to side with her or kill her.
Okay. Oh, that's a pretty good elevator pitch.
Yeah.
There's some movie producers in the audience tonight. So I have a million questions to ask you, and I'm sure the audience has a million questions for you, but before we do that, I wonder if you would read.
Yeah, I'm just going to read a short little passage that I think kind of gets at the spirit of the book and some of the setting. I'm adrift in my reminiscences when some crap begins to fall out of the sky. It's not sleet or snow this time, but something I've never seen. Dark flakes of some kind of substance come down like leaves from a tree, and they make a muddy smear when my windshield wiper pulls them across the glass. I can squirt it off with the windshield wiper fluid, but at this rate I have to wonder whether the fluid will last another 19 miles. A few drivers are already pulled over to the side of the road, and I pass a family van with all their belongings in cardboard boxes roped to the top of their vehicle. The boxes look like they've seen some extreme weather conditions, and also they are spotted in a way that suggests that they've been passed over by some flocks of birds. I don't know what exactly is raining down this time. Maybe detritus from the typhoon off the northwest coast, or ash from the Mount Silver Throne volcano up in Canada. But I reckon we'll all get used to and adjust our expectations accordingly. It's true that the world isn't in great shape, but I've read that it's not the worst it's been. Not as bad as it was in 536 CE when catastrophic volcanic eruptions caused a short-term ice age, devastating famine, and so forth. Probably not as bad as it was in 1349. Maybe not even as bad as 1520. But we all sense that worse times are ahead. No doubt a day of reckoning for mankind is coming. Yet even for those of us who accept the inevitability of mass human death, there's still a cautious hope. We're waiting to see how Armageddon plays out, keeping an eye open for the ways it might turn to our advantage. Even in the worst case scenario, odds are that at least a few of our kind will struggle on long enough to evolve into creatures suitable for whatever new environment awaits us. I'm no evolutionary biologist, but I have faith in our species' stick-to-itiveness. I put my head down and keep driving, leaning forward over the steering wheel, the better to squint through the translucent smear of silt the windshield wipers leave as they make their sweep. I may only be going 10 miles an hour, but I'm a man hell-bent on a destination.
That's the dramatic flair.
I get the. I have a voice for it.
Yeah, you put some actorly energy into that book. So, okay, you described Sleepwalk to this audience as would you say a red shirt mercenary? Who, that's the voice we just heard. His name is Will, or maybe his name is Will. It's not really clear what his name is.
No, he has a lot of aliases.
Yeah.
I think he feels more like a Will or a Billy to me now.
Okay.
That's
You
what I
come
think.
to know him.
Yeah.
You can call him Billy. And it's kind of a road book of this man crossing an American landscape.
Not just an American landscape, but every single state gets mentioned in the book. That's my Easter egg.
Oh, I'm stopping because my mind is really blown by that.
Yeah.
Really?
Every single state.
Huh.
He doesn't go through every single state in the present tense, but he has been.
Does the book describe or mention or specify what year it takes place in?
No. And that's deliberate because, I think the hardest thing for writers right now is figuring out how to write about the contemporary moment. Because a book, you write a book now, it'll be out in 2 years.
Yeah.
God knows what's going to happen. And so, I just sort of put it in an alternate universe that's like 1 or 2 pandemics after this one, 1 or 2 constitutional crises along the way.
So, like, January. I think that the audience probably heard, even in that brief passage that you read, that there's a sense of humor in Sleepwalk, which I would characterize as a departure from the previous book. I heard somebody laugh. I heard another laugh. Ill Will, which is how do I describe it? Which is maybe the most fucked up work of fiction I've ever read in my life. And there's nothing funny about Ill Will. Although that makes it sound humorless. It's not without humor, but there's nothing funny about that book.
Right.
This book feels funnier to me. And I wonder if you could talk to me about whether or not that was conscious and whether or not that was a response to the time in which you wrote this book.
Well, first of all, I will say I laughed and laughed when I was writing Ill
Okay,
Will.
well, on behalf of everyone in this room who's read it, I'm just going to tell you that no one who read it.
No, I know. And, when I was writing this, I was really kind of responding to it got good reviews, but, I was surprised by, some of the reviews were like, this novel is so disturbing that, and I'm like, oh, come on, grow up. But I was responding to, like, okay, I need to do something funny. Not so much that I needed to make myself laugh, but I wanted to show people that I could be funny. So that was part of it.
Okay, so there was a conscious.
It was
choice
I always set sort of technical challenges for myself when I start out, and so I wanted to do. I'd never done a novel that was wholly in first person that took place primarily in one sort of. This takes place over the course of 2 months or so. And so, I'd been writing these books that were like multiple perspective, like chopped up time, all of that stuff. And this was, I wanted to do that, let's do something that was very voicey, and very much immediate, not a lot of, I didn't want to like do things that were too technically showy in the way that Ill Will was sort of like I was doing a lot of postmodern stuff with text and type and all that
so
stuff.
in Ill Will, for example, there are sections of the book in which the text is arrayed across the page, sort of down in sort of discrete chunks, and so the reader faces this challenge of like, how do I negotiate this text?
Right.
Whereas Sleepwalk is a more straightforward or conventional, like novelistic form.
Right. I mean, writing a novel in first person present tense is fucking hard. It's ridiculous. And so, but it doesn't, it's not something that a reader will be like, oh wow, he's being fancy. Right. And there's also the fact that there's a main character who never appears on stage until almost the very end.
Spoiler alert, but
it's sort of appears.
Right.
But so that was a huge technical challenge, and that was fun. It was sort of like, you have to figure out ways to make it interesting without like having a lot of phone conversations.
Yeah, but it's funny because what you just said is okay. So in Ill Will, the endeavor was to apply some real thinking about form to the finished work and to sort of create something that's sort of like there's a level of difficulty for the reader.
Right.
I described that there are sections of text that move. The reader has to choose how to negotiate them, but it's not only that. Like there's a sort of a difficulty.
No, it's a hostile. It's hostile to the reader in a lot of ways.
Okay. You said it, so I can.
Yeah,
it's hostile to the reader in a specific way.
In the way that a horror movie is hostile to a viewer. The purpose of the book is to fuck with you.
Is to provoke you.
Yeah.
But it's funny because what you're saying about a more comparatively what would sound more conventional, a first-person narration. There's like the time functions in this. The way time functions in this book functions in Sleepwalk is like you're just in it and it moves. It's not across generations. It's not across glacial time or something. But that also, I guess what I'm landing on is like I'm thinking about when I was your student. Like what you're saying is that it's as difficult to do the easy thing as it is to do the hard thing.
Yeah, and I never had tried to do something like this before. It's traditional in that it's a road novel. It's got shootouts and things like that.
I'm laughing so hard at the idea that this book is traditional. Yes, comparatively speaking, the book is Sleepwalk, the novel that we're talking about, has inherited a lot of extant form.
Mm-hmm.
The road novel, the crime novel.
Right.
When Julia introduced us, she used the word thriller. Is that a word that you would apply to this book or to your work more generally?
I guess so. I mean, my ultimate goal is to write something in every genre. To have written,
I can't
like
wait for the romance novel.
it's in progress. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. But first, I have the 3-volume high fantasy novel to put in.
Which I think is also a western. Isn't
The next
it?
one is a western.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a western that takes place at a traveling carnival. So I get to do a little of both.
But do you feel like thriller is an appropriate designation for the work that you do?
I mean, it's an appropriate designation for my intention in the sort of the effect of the form, right? I mean, every form is supposed to have some kind of effect, right? I mean, that's why it's described in the way that it is. And yeah, I mean, if you want to break it down to the very base level, I say, yeah, thrill. I want this to be a thrill ride, and I want, I would say comedic thriller, because I wanted this to be funny. I really wanted it so bad to be funny.
Yeah.
I mean, when I sent it to you early on, I was nervous because I mean, you are really, really funny, and I was like, it's gonna be funny. Please say it's funny.
It is very funny, but the trick with humor on the page is that in the context of watching the film or sitting in a live audience, you kind of understand as the audience that you have permission, when you have permission to laugh.
Right.
And when you're alone with the book, it can be a little more mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a little elusive, and you're like, is this funny? Even in the very brief snippet that we heard you read today, and Will is describing the cascade of disaster. I don't know. I don't even know what the noun would be, but the cascade of sort of like disasters that mark modern life, when we are all witnessing them in real time, as we all are constantly. I mean, there was one an hour ago.
Right.
None of us are quite laughing. At the same time, the book seems to suggest that maybe humor is really the only way to deal with what's happening.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the touchstones for me with this book is a meme that I still think is hilarious. It's the one where the dog is sitting holding a cup of coffee in a coffee shop that's burning down, and he's thinking, this is fine.
I mean, how many literary novelists talk about meme as like the touchstone for them?
Well, I mean, I'm not super highbrow in my tastes, but
I guess that's why it's so striking to hear the application of a term like thriller, like a genre term, because that is useful for the reader to set their own expectations, but it's something that many writers bristle at. I don't sense that they care
I
about
hate
that.
it when writers bristle
Yeah.
at that. I feel like there's like some kind of snobbery
Yeah.
at work where you're just, I am too good to be
Yeah.
like ranked with the likes of, almost all the great writers.
But even to hear you describe the ill will in the way that you did, it's like the book has to have, for the book to elicit a response is kind of a marvel. And the thriller, to elicit the response of thrill is kind of a marvel. And to laugh at being thrilled is,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I read to have an emotional response, and I also read to be entertained. And I don't necessarily read to find out what it's like to be like a boring, bitter person in Norwegia.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it Norwegian? Norwegia?
Norway.
Or France, or Italy,
Yeah.
wherever you happen to be living your boring life,
I mean, I know what that's like, but I don't know what it's like to be enclosed in a sensory deprivation tank and left to die.
Okay, please don't talk about
Okay.
that. It's really upsetting to me. That's actually the worst part of Ill Will. For those who have not read the book. Okay, so we heard Dan describe Sleepwalk as a road novel, sort of like a renegade outside of the systems of law, crossing the country. Apparently, all 50 states are mentioned. News to me. Doing what he's doing, what readers watch Will do, is pretty grisly. He does like some pretty bad stuff. He is in the employ of sort of a shadowy force, a shadowy criminal force. I don't want to spoil what happens in this book. But for all of the construct of that plot, of this man having an adventure in a sort of wasteland of a country that is sort of disturbingly recognizable, to me, at the end, what this book felt like to me was fundamentally a book about being a parent. And that felt so connected to Ill Will, which is a terrifying, terrifying book about serial killers, or a serial killer, it's unclear. That is fundamentally, it's not unclear to Dan, but it's unclear to readers. That is fundamentally a book about what it is to love your children.
Right.
And this is a question that I wanted to ask you because it's a question that I'm asked, but people very rarely ask parents who are men this question. And I wonder if you could talk about what parenthood or fatherhood has done to your practice as a novelist.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I had kids at a really young age. I had my first child at 24, and so it was being a dad was part of my life from a very early stage, and it built. I mean, a lot of my writing is built around that. As my kids got older, like once they were in high school, I just co-opted them as readers. This is I think the fourth book that they've been the first readers for, and I take their advice and and I also like very deliberately steal from their lives, in a way that I make sure they know about. So they can, that if they have objections to things that I'm using, they can let me know early on. And so in some ways, I don't know. When I was a kid, my dad used to make me do all kinds of horrible men work that I hated. Like fixing cars or
Sounds awful to me.
Yeah, I mean all and going fishing and doing and hunting. Oh my God, I hated killing things. But at the same time, I see myself doing the exact same thing except from my job. So I like. It's like,
so you're not like going to buy a ladder. You're like, read this literary novel.
right. Come out to the garage. And I'm gonna read something to you, and then you're gonna critique it.
But I think I think it's worth lingering on because again, I do feel like this is a question that is often put to our colleagues who are women who are also parents about how do you reconcile having this thing that you do, this profession's calling. Is it in opposition to your office as a parent? That's somehow so sacred when you're a mother, but when you're a father, like John Cheever, you're allowed to just be like a monster and ignore your children and, do horrible things to them. And, but it's...
Well, I mean, and I wasn't that kind of parent. I mean, my wife, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when they were both still in grade school, and she died when they were in high school. And so I was like the primary caretaker. I was a single parent for for a lot of their lives, and in their entire adult lives. And so they were always there. I just felt like And maybe it's easier to do this as a man with boys, where you can just say, you're gonna do this with me, and this is like it or lump it.
Yeah.
I mean, women have to do that too, but I mean, I feel like you get less criticism about it as a guy.
I think that's right, which is why I wanted to ask you about it, because I think it's also the case that it's given you a subject. I mean, I think the last time I saw you, we had dinner a couple months ago, and you told me about your children, the relationship between your children and your process, that they are your sort of early editors, and they read and they talk to you about they shape what you're doing.
Right.
But not only do they shape what you're doing in terms of its finished product, they've provided this great subject for you, because in Sleepwalk, the sort of animating energy of the book is that Will is having these sort of misadventures or, this crime spree across the American landscape, and at the same time is conducting these conversations on a cell phone with a voice that claims to be his daughter.
Right.
And this voice becomes sort of the antagonist of the book, and we don't get to see the face behind that voice. The book, you'll see. I don't want to spoil that aspect of the book, but the book then functions as a book about, what's happening to the social fabric, how far, what morality is, but ultimately what Will is driven by is his feeling of paternity to this voice.
Right.
And that's so extraordinary to me. That's like such an, and I feel the same way about Ill Will, which is that it's a book about a serial killer, yes, and if you are a weirdo basement dweller who loves books about serial killers, you will love this book, but if you are someone who is really deeply moved by parental relationships, you will read that book and be like, this is the most beautiful book about what it is to feel like to be a father, And I think that's such I just wanted to press you on it, because I think it's,
right.
No one asks that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the emotional heart of Sleepwalk is that relationship, and it's that you've got this guy who more or less his job has created a situation in which he's never had any kind of human connection, and I think it's about the longing for that.
Yeah.
And the sort of, no matter how stripped down our lives have become, we still, need each other.
Yeah. It's
I mean, that's very sentimental.
And that's the sort of trick about your work, I think, is that there's a lot. It's not. I wouldn't say sentimental, because I think that has a negative connotation, but there's an emotional feeling. It's not just about misadventure. It's about,
Right.
Yeah, it's this other thing. And I think that's so beautifully done. And again, I just think no one really ever asks men this question. So we already talked about the question of when this book is set. It's not quite the present. It's not exactly the future. It's sort of like an adjacent. It's like to the left.
Right. I mean, the problem is if you follow his cultural
The cultural
references. It happened I think it happened in 2018.
So it does feel fixed in this current moment. At the same time, it relies on something I personally associate more with science fiction, which is the trappings of building a world. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which that thinking played into the construction, or your relationship to science fiction and world building, even as you're doing something that I think is ultimately really about emotion.
Right. Well, I mean, I didn't want it to take over. I wanted it to be off to the side, just glimpsed along the way, and it, I mean, in part because I think that's the way the character experiences it, but I think, I feel like it's the way we all experience the sheer weight and of the shittiness of the world we live in. I mean, you can't dwell on it 24 hours a day.
Right.
You have to go to the grocery store, you have to go to the movies, and you know, you have to have you know, playtime with your kids. And so, you know, like there's this shadow outside the door, but you know, most of the time you can't emotionally deal with it. And that was something that I really wanted to write about. So I had, you know, like in this, you know, there's this volcanic ship falling from the sky. I don't even know what it is. But he's just driving along. Everybody's driving along. They're trying, you know, and you know, part of your mind is screaming, but part of your mind is thinking, boy, I hope I can get to the rest area where they have hamburgers.
I mean, it's like, I don't know if anyone's had the, I haven't actually seen this in person, but there are some grocery stores now that have like a robot in them.
Mm-hmm.
Gee, does anyone know what I'm talking about? Can you imagine going to the grocery store and just like needing to buy eggs and there being a robot in your way and being like, I can't really handle this robot right now. Like, I just need my eggs. Like, I gotta go.
Right. There's a drone in this. There's a bunch of different drones. There are security drones, but there's also a little drone that flies around and follows you like a butterfly. That just takes pictures of you to post to social media. And I thought I was really clever inventing this. It turns out that it is a thing now. So I just missed it being science fiction. Barely.
But, you know, so for all of that kind of imaginative apparatus of like what the future might actually look like, literalizing in this fictional way what the future might look like. This book relies on the telephone. So Will, as he is behind the wheel of his, what does he call his cars?
He calls it the guiding star. It's a mobile home.
Right. So as he's behind the wheel, like really most of the book is him behind the wheel.
Yeah, almost the whole thing.
And he has a bucket full of cell phones. And he has all these identities, and he has all these different burner phones, and but most of the exchange between Will and this voice takes place over the telephone. And I wonder if you could talk about the telephone, like, I think you said this to me before. You said to me before that it was a convention of noir, the idea of a voice over the telephone. And I was also thinking about, like, whether or not this book will fix that idea of the voice of the telephone for a generation that will no longer talk on the telephone. Like, I wonder if you could talk about, like, what it, you know, are you writing about a kind of technology that is no longer really salient?
God, it would be horrible if it was all just texting, wouldn't it?
I think it is for younger people.
I know.
I mean, have you called someone who's funny on the telephone?
Yeah. No, neither one of my sons would pick up the phone.
No.
I guess in that way it's sort of highlighting the older person in the relationship. Because I suspect that the woman who claims to be his daughter would not contact her peers this way, but this is the only way that she can reach him.
Right.
And it allows me to sort of keep the mystery of her identity alive for longer, because he's also not. He never goes on the internet.
Right, that's another like key plot point, is that like this is a reality much like the one in which we live that exists sort of virtually, but there's an imperative for Will to sort of hide from.
Right. I
the
mean
internet.
that's his big selling point, is that he is not in the panopticon.
Yeah, he's like not a citizen, he's like an invisible person.
Right.
There's something so intimate about that idea of the telephone. I mean, it's funny because I'm trying to get in touch with someone who is in their 80s, and I was told by the people who sort of like control access to this person, like, oh, you have to write him a letter. I was like, right, how do you do that? Like, I don't even understand how you do that anymore, but I wonder, like, there's something about the book that sort of like, it documents this intimacy that is no longer a part of everyday life, you know? And that felt really lovely to me, that it captures that feeling. I remember being a teenager and talking on the phone for like 3 hours at a time, like, about who knows what. Like, just the idea and that what that is able to do as a novelistic tool in this book.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. But people still want to talk to each other, don't they?
Do they? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, they want to listen to records, so maybe telephones will come back to fashion.
Yeah.
You know?
But, I mean, you don't think that they even, like...
I mean, I'm too old to ask this question.
I
Like,
know.
I talk on the phone all the time, but I'm actually not
You're not sure?
representative.
Okay.
Yeah, you know. But I do think this is one of the great telephone call books of all time. I'm getting the signal, so I should tell the audience that you can ask your questions if you have them. But I also have these rapid fire questions that I love to ask. I could do this for so much longer. So raise your hand if you have a question, and then we'll call it. Yes, oh, right away. There you go, go ahead.
Oh, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Ohio Mike. I am a student of dance from the late 90s at Ohio University.
Right.
When I found myself in Fiction 300 with Dan Chaon as a non-English major. And the thrust of the course, for me anyway, what I remember, in fact, my favorite course I've ever taken, was about voice and developing your voice as a writer. So, you know, I saw your photo in the New York Times in 2006 for Among the Missing, and I was so struck by that, and I saw you in the Times today, and Joshua Ferris writes, what prevails above the plot is the voice, which is consistently winning and odd for so bloody a tale, unfailingly warm. So, and I remember you as humorous and warm from those days, in fact, giving us something to read called The Sheep Child, which is still one of my favorite poems. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about what you said earlier about the voiciness of this and the process to get there and develop this character's voice.
Well, one thing I realized when I was writing this was that in some ways I was evoking the voice of my biological father, who I had met when I was in my early 30s, and we had a relationship until he died a couple years ago. And it was a way for me to kind of still be in conversation with him in a strange way. And also, he was just such a weirdo. He had this kind of voice that was like half hippie, half redneck. And he was smart, but he was also like kind of amoral and a liar. So there were all these, I had a lot of mixed feelings about him. And it was a way to kind of write about my experience as this person who called him up and then suddenly got sucked into his weird, incredibly strange life. But from the opposite end. Because it was true that for whatever reason, and I want to say that there's some kind of instinctual thing behind it, we like fell in love like that, like after the first conversation, you know, and I mean that in like a father and son way. And people, I've heard people say, well, you know, I mean, why does he care? She's just his biological child, and she's a sperm donation. Like, what does he care about this person? But I mean, my experience is that there is something, there is some kind of connection that happens. So, I mean, does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah.
So when you are thinking, I mean, I guess maybe more generally when you're thinking about voice, in this particular book, it's told in the first person, so the voice of the character becomes sort of the voice of the text.
Right.
Do you think that you always locate that in reality, or do you think, like, to what extent can you just make that up out of whole cloth?
Well, I mean, once you sort of start a kind of language web, or whatever it is that you're doing when you're creating a voice, it begins to build itself. Like, oh, this character would never say that. And in early drafts, for example, he swore a lot, and then I realized he doesn't swear at all, ever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is a strangely wholesome book.
right.
Yeah.
And so there were moments where I kind of had to go back, and once I realized, like, cynical things were not his way of viewing things. I found that I had to change certain things as I was going along, but as the deeper I got to know him, the more the voice felt like it was something I could enter into. It is like this this algorithm and a set of vocabulary words and a way of putting language together that has a particular kind of music to it, that somehow it teaches you how to write it as you go along. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, you know when it's right. You know when
Yeah.
it's wrong. Yeah. That's a good answer. Does anyone else have a question? Megan.
I wanted to know about your relationship to the con artist, because that is a big trope in thrillers and noir, and sort of literal or figurative come up in your books a lot, and I just wondered if that's just sort of an abiding fascination, or is maybe particular to sort of, it is such an American type, maybe the most American.
Right. Well, I mean, I've known a lot of con artists in my life, and I'm almost always the biggest sucker in any room. But I also grew up reading. Some of my favorite novels and novelists were people who wrote about conmen. And I'm thinking Patricia Highsmith, for example, was a huge influence on me as a kid. Shirley Jackson. I mean, her people are not con people per se, but they're liars and self-deluders. And so, I mean, like, it was something that has always fascinated me as a reader, and it just also is a kind of just a part of my life.
The liar.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the back.
I was wondering when Sleepwalk got its title, and if there were any other titles you considered?
It got its title from. I mean, it had a title from from the beginning, and in part, I mean, it goes back to that meme. It's an old song from the 50s by Santo and Johnny. You could. I mean, you're probably familiar with it, but I was having a panic attack that had to do with a lot of the shitty things that were happening during Trump's administration, and we all had panic attacks about this.
One more.
But then as I was driving, that song, the Sleepwalk song was playing, and it just put me into kind of a trance, and I was like, you're fine. And and then the song Sleepwalk, near, 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 near. It's got this real like dreamy quality to it, and that's what I was thinking about, how necessary it had become for me to get into that sleepwalking state.
Disassociate.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's Trump's America.
Yeah.
Disassociate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people my age dissociate, but
You drink to excess.
right. Right.
Yeah, go ahead. Up here.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Dan, I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about about form and innovation in starting with, your first book, Fitting Ends, and how you thought about the formal innovation of each book, how that changed with you as a writer.
Yeah. I just want to give you a shout out, by the way. This is Carolyn Farrell. She's the author of Dear Mistress Mount Metropolitan, a book that I just adore and which is itself a technical marvel. And you've always been. I mean, your first collection of stories was inspiring to me because of like the sort of interesting technical things that you were doing, and especially with voice. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that did a lot of damage to me was I started out as a poet, and I love line break, and I love the things that poets get to do that you're not really allowed to do in prose.
Right.
And so I mean, a lot of times the way that I want to put things together is inspired by poets that I'm jealous of, and by wanting to create effects that are either cinematic or poetic that you don't usually get to play with in prose. And that, I mean, those are the two things that I'm trying to figure out how to stab myself.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
go ahead.
you.
Hey, so I'm wondering, when you kind of decide or you realize that you're writing a genre novel, like a road novel, do you consciously go back and think and examine the tropes, or is it just you rely on your accrued knowledge?
I feel like if it was a genre that I didn't consume very much, I might try to examine the tropes, but I kind of feel like if it was a genre I wasn't a big consumer of, I wouldn't write it in the first place. I mean, I'm interested in genres because that's one of the things I really love to read. And I realized that, when like as a kid, I read almost exclusively genre stuff, but it was, it was pretty wide. It was pretty across the board. And then, when I got to college, there was this real heavy emphasis on mimetic realism as sort of like the exclusive way to write. And I kind of gave up all that stuff for a period of maybe 15 years, and then I was like, what am I doing? Why did I like throw away everything that I loved about reading for this? And not, because it's, the literary world can be so limited and so snooty too. And so it was just a desire to get back to the things that made me want to become a writer in the first place. You become a writer because you love reading and you want to do those tricks yourself. That's the same reason you become a magician.
Anyone else? All right, I have like a million more questions. I'm gonna ask Dan all these really short ones. Do we have time, Julia?
Yeah, let's do a few more.
All right, I'm gonna ask him all these really short questions.
All right.
Because I always like to ask these questions. Dan, what's your favorite movie?
Vertigo.
Whoa, wow, I love how you had such a fast answer. Do you write by hand or do you write on the computer?
I write everything longhand in
Everything?
Everything.
What the fuck?
I
You wrote
know.
this book by longhand?
I wrote it entirely in longhand, and I drew pictures as I was doing it.
Oh my god. First of all, your hands must be killing you. Okay, at what point do you enter into the computer?
Usually after a second pass longhand.
Wow. Oh my.
Well, you can't imagine what it looks like the first draft, because I like do spaces.
Yeah,
I have
sure. Yeah.
like in different forms. Like I sometimes break up the page like a comic book.
Okay. Is it a single legal pad or is it like multiple scraps of paper?
It's
Are you like Claire Danes and
no, I use this composition notebooks.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a really surprising answer.
I have a
to me.
question.
Yeah, no,
Don't
that's
blame
a
me on
great-
that because I know you teach with Linda Barry, and did you start using composition notebooks with her, or was that something you were
No, it
doing
was
before?
something that developed in parallel.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And what are you
Yeah.
gonna do with the pictures?
Nothing.
No.
I like to. I just like to draw, and it helps. I mean, that is something I picked up from Linda Barry. Is that sometimes drawing first can help you to find and define a scene.
Wow, God, that is. I'm really like my mind is blown. By that. Do you write in the morning? Do you write at night?
I write at night, and that is all because of kids.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have to wait until they were asleep before I
Yeah.
could start writing.
Yeah. Do you eat while you're writing?
No.
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 God, my mind is blown by the Do you drink while you're writing?
I do, but I have a very strict rule about. I have a strict policy about
Okay.
that.
So you keep yourself focused. Do you listen to music when you're
I
writing?
do. That's like the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
Is I have playlists. They are playlists that are specific to a particular
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
They all speak to the book.
Yeah.
They sort of, for whatever reason, they start to sort of congeal around the book. In this case, and this is not even music that I particularly like.
Yeah.
But Sleepwalk gave birth to all of this like 50s and 60s girl group stuff, and a lot of stuff that sort of reflects that, like you you remember that, you probably maybe remember the 80s band Suicide.
No.
But they did this kind of Twin Peaksy, retro 50s but punk sort of stuff. But yeah, so there were a lot of bands like that. Which I'm not even usually so crazy about, but somehow they became the soundtrack of this book, and he spends a lot of time listening to them.
Yeah. I also do that. I feel like it is your influence.
We
Weirdly,
spent. I mean, I would
no.
say like 50% of the time that we met, we just talked about
Music. And I wonder whether you have this experience, because I just was in a restaurant on Sunday and I heard one of the songs on the playlist of the book I'm working on now, and I wanted to run into traffic and like die. And they're like, what it does for me is it ruins the song. Like the song becomes a very useful tool in finishing the project, and then I could never listen to the song again.
No, I mean, there are songs that have been part of a playlist that I still love a great deal. But it does have a sort of Pavlovian effect.
Yes. Yeah. I should be writing.
I mean, it literally like it sends me into the world of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the trick.
Right.
It's like a call to the world of the story. When I put that playlist on, it helps me to sink right in. I don't have to do a lot of
Right.
I don't have to mess around. Yeah.
I think we're out of time, but my last question for you is, what is one book everyone in this room should have read? Or should read, or should buy tonight? That book's a magic. It's a hard question.
I know. Yeah,
it's too hard.
It's too hard. There are like
there are all these smart people in this room.
There's like everybody in here is a writer. No, I won't.
Okay, so you don't have to.
I refuse.
You don't have to answer it. I'll let you go. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alright, just a few quick logistics from my end. Just want to remind folks, Dan is going to be signing at that back desk where you came in, so let's give him just like a moment to get settled, catch his breath, and then you can start lining up. We are going to have additional copies of Sleepwalk available for purchase at the signing desk. We also have Dan's earlier book, Ill Will. We also have Rumaan's book, Leave the World Behind. Again, if you're still with us on YouTube, that's all in the bio, in the description on the video. That's all for me. So let's give these two one last.